All righty. So anyway, so today, well, basically we're going to follow up on our last two sessions. So during those meetings, we met two New Zealand biologists and collaborators, G.O.K. Sainsbury and E.A. Hodgson, who are 2/3 of the old triangle. So today we're going to finish up by learning a little bit about the third member, who is K.W. Allison. So this is one of our specimens we have from you here at UT, collected by K.W. Allison. You can see here in 1932 in a swamp near Aotearoa, North Island, New Zealand. And you can also see, you might notice that it was at one point part of the herbarium collection of G.O.K. Sainsbury, so a little hint of their connection there. This is the specimen itself, which is pretty cool to see. I can believe it came out of a swamp. It looks like it got some of the swamp came with it. And so about its collector, so K.W. Allison was Kenneth Willway Allison. So he was a New Zealand forester and biologist. He was born in 1894 in Wanganui, New Zealand, and he was the eldest of 3 sons in a farming family. And they grew up with a large property with lots of trees and gardens. And it said that he showed an interest in plants from a pretty early age. He attended the Wanganui Collegiate School, which might sound familiar. That's actually also where G.O.K. Sainsbury went to school. But Kenneth is about 14 years younger, so I don't think they probably overlapped or really met each other at that time. So in 1915, he enlisted in the Army, and you can see at that time his profession was shown as a farmer. And he served with the New Zealand Rifle Brigade on the Western Front during World War I. He received the British War Medal and the Victory Medal for his service, but he also may have come back with some other souvenirs. So in one article I read, it said he hoped when he joined up to see more of the world and its plants, and that he collected wildflowers in England, Scotland, and Western Europe during his tour of duty. So I looked and I was not able to find any digitized specimens from that time period. So I'm not sure if they kind of survived, but it would be interesting to see if anyone has any collections that he made when he was serving in the Army. So he returned back to New Zealand in 1919 and married Olive May Lowry, and the pair had 3 daughters. And initially he went back to farming, but in 1925 he began a career in forest management. So he worked first with the New Zealand Forest Service at a nursery, and then with a couple of different private companies, plantations and nurseries during the Great Depression. So in the 1930s, he actually worked for a company called Perpetual Forests. And he said he planted up to 2,000 trees a day. It was the hardest job that he ever had. And then he ended up back in the Forest Service. So, and he worked at a number of different areas, different forests throughout the North Island. So in 1945, he had the opportunity to move to the South Island, to this Otago region. And he lived in a town called Dunedin. And he was basically the district ranger for that region until his retirement in 1959. And I found this really cool picture. So this is the New Zealand Forest Service Field Officers Refresher Course in 1947. And you can see Allison here kind of in the middle on the right is him participating in that training. So he collected plants throughout his entire life, and he is initially interested in orchids and ferns. So these are a couple actual orchid specimens that he collected in the early 1920s. But in 1927, he came across a specimen of this moss called Buxbaumia aphylla, which is also known as bug on a stick moss or elf cap moss. And it's super interesting, super unique in that unlike most mosses, which are kind of leafy and green and big, this moss, most of its life is microscopic. It's colorless. It has no stems. It has almost no leaves. And it's not usually noticed at all until it produces these sporophytes that are proportionally really huge and very striking. So it's really cool. The moss itself, all these green leaves around here, those are other mosses. So the moss itself is, they said, it looks kind of like a very thin layer of almost felt. And most of the times you don't even notice it until it produces these. And he talks about finding this. So he says, it was not until 1927 that by chance, while cutting fire breaks, I came across Buxbaumia aphylla, a curious moss with practically no leaves. As I was corresponding with H. Kars at the time, I sent some of the moss to him, but knowing nothing about these plants, he gave me the address of G.O.K. Sainsbury. Buxbaumia was then not known from New Zealand, but Sainsbury sent the specimens on to H.N. Dixon, an expert on mosses in England. So that is how he met Sainsbury. They became correspondents. And he goes on to say he found another species of that same Buxbaumia genus, and then another species of a different genus of leafless moss, Ephemeropsis, and he was hooked. And so that's how he got into collecting mosses, and he struck up, like I said, a long-standing correspondence with G.O.K. Sainsbury. He would send him specimens to get identified. In 1931, he published his first paper on mosses that live in different habitats. The following year, he published a guide to liverworts for Australian readers. He struck up a faithful correspondence with E.A. Hodgson, so she helped identify the liverworts that he would find in his collections. And he also corresponded with a range of other international collectors in Europe and the United States. So by the time he moved to South Island in 1945, he had 800 packets of mosses and 800 liverworts. But then in just 5 years, that ballooned to 3,500 mosses and 5,000 liverwort packets. After he retired from the Forest Service, so in 1949, you can see he published a lot of their papers on new taxa, identification keys for mosses. And when G.O.K. Sainsbury passed away in 1957, Allison became kind of the moss taxonomist. And he helped with identifications for students and other collectors, and was a resource for the staff on a number of universities. And it said in his later years, he wasn't physically able to kind of get out in the field as much. So he really loved to see specimens that were collected in mountainous and remote areas. So he, at least 2 of the new taxa that he discovered, he named after his collaborators, so Hodgson and Sainsbury, and they named at least several taxa after him as well, which is pretty cool. So he continued to publish several books on mosses and liverworts, describe a number of new taxa. He organized and cataloged the herbaria of the Canterbury Museum and the University of Otago. And he spoke frequently to groups of the public about trees and botany. So he stayed really active until he passed away in 1976. So of his over 10,000 moss specimens, almost 8,000 liverworts, they were donated in 1975 to the Botany Division of the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, which does not exist anymore. So they're now housed at the Allen Herbarium, which is in Christchurch, New Zealand. And we have, like I said, a little over 2,600 specimens of his digitized in the portal so far, 32 in the lichen portal, and then I was able to find about 3,000 in the Australasian Virtual Herbarium database. And like Sainsbury and Hodgson, there's some really beautiful specimen images at the Museum of New Zealand online, which are really cool to check out. Including this one, which you can see is a type specimen. So it was used to describe a new species, and it was actually described by Allison and named after Sainsbury. And this one was really cool. So if you look here, this is a specimen of this Buxbaumia, so that elf cap, bug on a stick moss that was collected in August of 1927. So possibly one of those he mentions finding that inspired him to get into biology, which is really, really cool. And again, you can see this is actually an isotype. So it's a duplicate of a specimen that was used to describe this new species in that genus. So kind of a really cool connection to see directly his story to the specimens. And that is our New Zealand Old Triangle. So obviously these 3 were collecting and working with other collectors in New Zealand, outside of New Zealand, but it still seems like it was a pretty effective partnership and a pretty cool story that, like I said, we're helping preserve by digitizing their specimens. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this. And like I said, we'll have a new set of collectors next week. I'll have to kind of see who we want to talk about next. But anyways, pretty interesting.
Thank you for presenting that. It was